Hello and welcome everybody to the Canadian Obesity Network's public webinar series. Today's presentation focuses on the importance of sustained health behavior in achieving your best weight. My name is Brad Hussey. I'm the Communications Director for the Canadian Obesity Network and I'm your host today. Please keep in mind that you can use the volume controls on your computer to adjust the sound as we go along. Our public webinar series is really our way to connect with Canadians and disseminate credible and evidence-based information about obesity. Through this platform, we gather experts to weigh in on issues ranging from obesity bias and discrimination to prevention and treatment and public policy and more. If you'd like to be a part of our growing public community, and we definitely want you to be, and you want to hear more about our future webinars and other events, you can head over to obesitynetwork.ca/public, and you can opt in to receive our free newsletter and check out some of the other content that we have there. Keep in mind, too, that an archive of this webinar will be posted and available for free viewing on the obesitynetwork.ca website. Just look for obesitynetwork.ca/webinars. And keep in mind that due to the extremely high participation rate we have for these webinars, we have disabled the microphone and question and answer features here. However, we do want you to be able to ask questions of our speakers and reach out to us. However, we do want to answer any questions that you might have, so you can reach out to us via social media at the channels that you see here. And there's also an evaluation survey at the end of the presentation we'd love for you to fill out, and it allows you to ask questions as well. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Michael Vallis. Dr. Vallis is a registered health psychologist in Halifax who, among many other accomplishments, developed the Behaviour Change Institute, a training program for lifestyle counseling skills for physicians, nurses, dietitians, and other healthcare providers. Dr. Vallis.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure for me to present this webinar to you today. I have a long association with the Canadian Obesity Network. I'm one of the founding members of this website, and we have been quite active for a number of years at a level of professional engagement. But we've now, I think, really turned the tide, and we are really looking to incorporate the perspective and the voice and the collaboration of individuals living with obesity. And so this is a really great opportunity, I think, for us to continue the conversation. The title of this session is The Importance of Sustained Health Behavior in Achieving Your Best Weight. And I want you to pay close attention to that word, best weight. I'll begin this talk by saying something that might sound very controversial to you. And that is the following. When it comes to achieving health and managing our weight, we need to get the weight loss out of weight management. And my hope is by presenting this session to you, I can do one of two things. One, I will be able to help you to realize that we need to be extremely careful about setting specific weight goals. Two, there's a tremendous optimism in the number of things that individuals can do to actually improve their health, their function, and their quality of life. And this really embodies what we call the concept of best weight. And so I'm a health psychologist, and I am both an academic and provide training and research in the area of obesity and behavior change. And I also provide clinical work in working with individuals living with obesity, both obesity as a condition and also diabetes. The subtext here would be that if we're not careful and if we focus too much on this concept of weight loss, and one of the most common things I hear in my clinical work from individuals living with obesity is, if only I lost all this weight that I want to lose, everything in my life would be so much better. And so I think it's really important that we set very realistic goals and achievable goals. And so as a psychologist, I want to guide us through that. And I'm going to make the case that the potential for behavior change is actually quite strong, that there's a huge evidence base behind this that says that if individuals are able to change their behavior, positive things happen. But the catch is it's sustained change. Something you do for a week, a month, even a year that isn't sustained over the next 5 decades may not have the potential that it could have. And so we need to help people engage in behavior change in a way that empowers them to not only make the changes, but maintain the changes. So I'd like you to reflect on these statements. The strongest predictor of getting to a goal is not giving up. Most people, most of the time, resolve most of their problems all by themselves. We call this life. And the only caveat here is that the goal must be attainable. So the messages we want to leave are around achieving goals, sustaining goals, and using your own resources to do so. But it's important that you have a goal that's realistic. The evidence on healthy behavior is fairly strong, and these are some data that I think are quite useful to reflect on. So this is looking at healthy behaviors, healthy lifestyle behaviors. This is a European study of almost 24,000 people, and it categorized people in terms of their lifestyle factors. You got a point if you're a never smoker, a point if you have a BMI less than 30, a point if you exercise 3.5 hours a week, and if you eat healthy. Those that have a score of 4 had a reduction of 93% in their diabetes, 81% reduction in cardiac events, 50% reduction in stroke, and a 36% reduction in cancers. So you can see the benefits associated with those healthy lifestyles. This is a Japanese study that's very similar, only this is a larger sample, 62,000 people, and they followed them over 12 and a half years. And they gave scores on 6 factors: not currently smoking, uh, drinking moderately, walking an hour a day, adequate sleep, which is a really important health behavior, daily veggie intake, and a BMI between 18.5 and 24.9. And what they did is they just counted the number of people who fitted into the category of 0 to 2 of those behaviors, and they just counted the number of people who died in this 12 and a half years. And if you had a score of 3, your risk of dying drops by 20%. A score of 4, your risk of dying drops 30%. If you had 5 of those 6 behaviors, your risk of dying dropped 40%. And those that had all 6 behaviors had a reduction of over 50% for both men and women in all-cause mortality. Very strong, strong evidence. This is a nice study that followed people over time. I love the title, by the way, Turning Back the Clock. And this study was called the Atherosclerosis Risk in Communities Study. About 16,000 people. And when it assessed healthy lifestyles based on not smoking, being a healthy weight, being physically active, and eating well, at the beginning of this study, 91.5% of those people were not engaged in a healthy lifestyle. What's really fascinating about this study is 6 years later they came back, and of those 91%, they found a small group, almost 10%, 8.4, who actually changed. They had become healthy. And then the study becomes very interesting because it followed those people over the next 4 years. And it showed similar data to what I've already showed you of people that have different lifestyle behaviors to start with. That those people who changed their lifestyle behavior had a 40% reduction in dying and a 35% reduction in all forms of cardiac events. So hugely positive data. These are data from a diabetes prevention program that was very pivotal in medicine. It really helped us. Not only it helped us to realize that healthy behaviors are important, but these data show that healthy behaviors can actually be more important than drugs. So if you look at on the left hand slide here, we're seeing how much weight was lost over this study with lifestyle, with drug, and with placebo. And you can see that there was a significantly greater weight loss associated with the lifestyle change. On the right side is the risk of developing type 2 diabetes over the next 3 years. And you can see again that behavior change is actually in these studies more powerful than medications. So that is a really important finding for us to become aware of, that it seems as though we can do things that will dramatically improve our health. And so now, as a psychologist making a recommendation to citizens about how to manage weight, what are the principles that we would be guided by? The first principle that I need you to be aware of is that the strongest predictor of what people do in the future is what they've done in the past. Now that's an important beginning observation because that says that change is hard. And so many people, when they're trying to change, they get defeated and they get down on themselves because they feel like, oh, I tried, but it didn't work, and they ran into a roadblock. And the point here is to try to emphasize that yes, it is hard, but that doesn't mean it can't be successful. And so we're trying to encourage people to maintain their focus on their behavior, even if it doesn't seem like it's giving you all that you want. I want you to think about the following case scenario: 100 people who are living with obesity, and for 20 years they've been interested in losing weight. And so that's pretty common. And what we discover is that most of those people have actually lost weight successfully in the past. They've lost it once, twice, three, even four or more times. So this tells us that people who are living with obesity have episodes of behavior change and episodes of significant weight management. But what happens over time is that if it's not sustained, most people are actually heavier now than 20 years ago when they started. And so that's a really alarming factor. And again, it speaks to the point not that behavior change can't happen, it can, but that it's sustained behavior change. It's much more important that you make a change that you could continue with than it is that you make dramatic changes. So change is hard. The strongest predictor of changed behavior is something that we call self-efficacy. This is your confidence in your ability to engage in a behavior in the face of barriers. So let's talk about your confidence this evening if you could go into a buffet restaurant and manage to have what you would consider to be good portion control over your meal. And so I want you to think a bit about a Chinese buffet, or think about an American steakhouse buffet, or think about an Italian pasta bar buffet. You could think about those scenarios, and depending on what your triggers are, what kinds of foods you struggle with, then how confident are you that you could get through that specific event? That concept is what we try to build: self-efficacy, not hope, but actual confidence that a person has the ability to perform a specific behavior. I'm going to go to that Italian buffet and I'm going to have a small amount of pasta, and I'm going to have the rest of my plate filled with vegetables and salad. Third principle is we need to accept behavior change is hard. What happens in clinical care is that people come in, and this happens almost every day, and they say, I tried, but it didn't work. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I've let you down. So there's this tendency that we all have, and clinicians do exactly the same thing. They tend to say, oh, you were doing so well. What happened? And as it turns out, we need to really step back from that perspective and not think that, oh, yeah, behavior change is easy, and once you've changed it, of course you're going to stay. In fact, to realize that there's a lot of things that push back against healthy behavior, to the point where this bullet I've just put up is actually very scary and very true. That in the societies in which we live, healthy behavior has now become actually abnormal behavior. And that's because human behavior is driven by the pleasure principle. We approach pleasure, we stay away from pain. So I want you to think about what that means about food choices. And one of the things I always like to tell people is apple pie will always taste better than apples, and apples will always be better for you than apple pie. Good luck with that. So we have that push and pull. And we need to be mindful that when we approach substances, when we see foods, when we engage looking at physical activity, the natural tendency that we have is to do what makes us feel the best. As a matter of fact, in research looking at how the brain responds to various food stuff, the following two substances light up the pleasure centers of the brain equally, and those two substances are sugar and cocaine. So a drug as powerful as cocaine is actually equaled by sugar in terms of what it does to the pleasure center of the brain. So don't be upset at yourself if you find that you get drawn towards those foods. Of course you do. That's because of the pleasure principle. And what we need to do is help you, and what you need to do is help yourself find ways of making apples your preference over apple pies, knowing that it's hard. Human behavior follows what we call the path of least resistance, and this is what we've seen with technology, that that our society has given us more and more reasons to stay seated and to not expend energy. That's called the path of least resistance. And we know that with regard to weight management, that movement is so important. And it doesn't matter whether you're lifting soup cans as you're watching television, or if you're using a TheraBand in a chair, or if you're at the gym. It doesn't matter what you're doing. We don't want to put sort of judgment values into one form of activity is better than another. We really want to promote people in just resisting this tendency to get caught up in in that sort of lifestyle of where you park as close as you can to the entrance. You take an escalator if it's there. You take the elevator when it's there. And humans follow this preference for short-term gain. We're very, it's challenging for us to sort of make a behavior choice that kind of makes us suffer in the minute, but maybe benefit down the road. And I think the best way I see that is when I ask you about an episode of overeating. And, what's the anatomy of a binge episode? Well, in the moment, it tastes so good, but you're really upset at yourself down the road. Even a couple of hours later, you're very upset at yourself for what you did. Now, the other choice would, of course, be to choose the apple, not the apple pie, which you'd maybe feel a bit disappointed in the moment. But if you compare that to how you feel 2 hours later, you're actually proud of yourself for making that choice. So this is showing you that when it comes to changing behavior, we need to be mindful that these principles, path of least resistance, pleasure principle, preference for short-term gain, that's what's normal. That's what the brain is designed to do. And so not only that, we put that brain into an environment where it's very difficult to walk anywhere. It's very difficult to drive bicycles in our cities, that we have to commute long distance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the scientific view is shown in this little piece of the slide. There are two brain systems. There's the midbrain, that's the one on the bottom left. That's an old part of the brain, and that's where the emotional brain is. And it sends signals like, I want it all, and I want it now. And then on the top right, you can see the frontal lobes. And this is where we call these the executive functions of the brain. So this is the logical brain. This is the brain that says, well, hang on a second. I had a meal last night that was a bit high fat, a bit high calorie. So I think today, you know what, the best thing for me to do is to stay away from that place and to go over here. But what's important here is that these two brain systems are active at all times, and they're sending different messages to us at the same time. And so we need to understand that. So don't feel guilty when you get pulled in two directions. That what we need to do is actually commit people, help people commit to the pathway. That we, in this pathway, we believe, so the science of behavior change would say that we need to, especially when it comes to our relationships with our family and our close loved ones and our healthcare system, that we need to have relationships that support change. So you might hang out with a friend who helps prepare healthy foods, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you go to your home and your partner says, well, because our children need to have some treats now and again, we have to have a cupboard full of tempting foods. Well, that's going to make it kind of challenging to do that. So what are those relationships? And then we need to help the motivation, develop the motivation to push against the pleasure principle, develop the motivation to push against that path of least resistance. When motivation is there, and think of the New Year's resolution where there's a high motivation time, but we know that New Year's resolutions have a high failure rate. And the reason we believe that's the case is because we believe that people don't really engage in the effective behavior modification strategies that would be recommended. And then the final is what we call emotion management. I don't think any of us would say that we don't have a comfort food. Every social group uses food to manage their social group. And so these are the steps to success. And a change-based relationship, what's really about this, especially from the healthcare provider, I spend a lot of my time with healthcare providers, and I really think that this kind of a webinar is really, for me, it's an excellent opportunity to actually have the same conversation with doctors and clinicians that I'm having with individuals living with obesity. And so what we need is we need to make sure that the system goes from this expert, right? Where the doctor is the expert and you're just there to be told what to do. And we need to move away from this, what we call teach and tell, towards a relationship that's really based on collaboration, where we both work together and that we respect that it is your life and it is really your decisions that are important. And can we negotiate? Can we discuss? Can we collaborate? And so it's important for you to think about that. And I would encourage you that if your relationship with your healthcare provider does not feel collaborative, then you can begin to to introduce that to the conversation. I often ask patients if they would be willing to ask their provider, why don't you ask me about this? Or do you know? And so, feel free to use this webinar as an example. You could say, I was on the Canadian Obesity Network site last week. I watched this webinar by this psychologist in Halifax, and he tells me that the best way that clinicians can help people is to go from teach and tell towards collaborative power. On the slide are principles that we call motivational communication. This is what we tell our providers. They should be asking you questions, listening to you, then they summarize it and they invite you to listen to them. That they should be curious and non-judgmental. Behavior needs to be understood, not judged, and that we need to understand that there's pushes and pulls in both directions. So this slide is to give you a bit of familiarity with these concepts. Um, there's something really important when it comes to behavior with regard to healthy weight, and that is that there are cautions here. It's one area of behavior change that is really in a psychological slippery slope. And why that's the case is as follows, that the average person living with obesity wants ideal weight. And there's just way too much focus in society about this notion that somebody who's living with high levels of weight can get back to the weight that they achieved when they were 21, or they can look like some model that's in a magazine. And so one of the real important things that we all have to do, that is healthcare providers, the Canadian Obesity Network, citizens in the country living with obesity, is we need to get rid of this unrealistic expectation that people can actually achieve the ideal weight. And that's because these expectations lead to this, if I don't succeed, I'm a loser. If you don't win, you lose. If you're not a success, you're a failure. So it becomes a very judgmental context. And the reality is that people really cannot lose a terrific amount of weight. So you actually cannot, your weight isn't like a dial on a thermometer that you can turn up and down. So if someone says, oh, I want to lose 110 pounds, then the likelihood that they could actually lose 110 pounds exactly and stay there is extremely low. Now, what's important here is that that doesn't mean they can't achieve a healthier weight, and that doesn't mean they can't achieve their best weight. And the other part here is bias exists at all levels. And so it's really important when we look at behavior change in obesity that we really address this issue of expectation. Quite literally, the problem with the expectation is, in fact, the expectation. My weight is my worth. This is a false belief that virtually all people in society tend to believe. So it's really important to expose this as a challenge. And if you look at the evidence, here's what you see. The average model, 5'9", 110 pounds, has a body mass index that's actually low and potentially dangerously low. Compare that to the average American female, 5'4", 142, with a healthy BMI of 24.3. And we can see this, that when we pursue these ideals, then you often end up with this as well. You end up with the opposite. And we know that there's a huge problem around this kind of scenario. And you see these before and after shots that really set people up for failure, right? Go big or go home. And these beliefs are really challenging. And we just need to expose them. We need to get up and say, look, here's how we've operated. My weight is my worth. Therefore, if I don't have a good weight, I don't have good worth. And if I don't get to that goal, if I'm not impressing everybody in my street, then it's not worth continuing. And I would, as a psychologist working in the field of obesity, I would really like to see this shift and see this change because it is actually really important. We need to address self-esteem, body image, healthy goals. We need to help people be proud of themselves for what they do, to appreciate what their bodies are, and to achieve goals that are healthy and that can be sustainable. We need to consider really switching from a focus of, outcomes that we can't really control. And this may sound kind of distressing to you, but we cannot control our body weight. The evidence is becoming stronger and stronger that genetics and culture and environments and history have a strong bearing on our weights. What we can control are the behavioral choices that we make. So I love to tell patients the following in my clinical work is that it doesn't matter what you ate yesterday, your next choice could be healthier. And so you always have that option of choosing a new behavior. And so it's really important for us to switch away from this. And so it's not that your weight won't change, but it's going to change in a way that is going to be controlled by other factors. And you will be a lower weight and you will be a better weight. But it's really about achieving a weight that makes you healthiest, happiest, and most functional, regardless of what it says in the scale. And we know that this apple versus pear, that, and the point here isn't to make a medical point. The point here is really to say people do not change their body shapes. That if you're an apple, you might be a big or a small apple. If you're a pear, you could be a big or a small pear. But you're most likely not going to transform yourself into some body shape, possibly a body shape you've never had. I want to talk very quickly about something that we call learned helplessness, because this is a really dangerous phenomenon. Let's say we encourage you to achieve a certain behavioral goal and then you want to stay there, right? And this one is clear. Everybody says, oh, I want to get healthy and stay healthy. The challenge is that behavior has all kinds of ups and downs, ups and downs. And if we hold this expectation, here's this tendency. Over time, what happens is that the person tries and fails. This is the language. Tries and fails. Tries and fails. And over time, what will happen is you can only try so long before you give up. It's something called learned helplessness. And that is experience is, well, if my efforts don't produce the outcome, I'll give up. So we need you to focus on your behavior, not your weight, because you control your behavior much more effectively than you can control your weight. And the problem with learned helplessness is a lot of people just, they give up and they don't start again. So this is a conceptual slide, and I just want to make this point to you. And I'd like to make this point as clearly as I possibly can, because I think this slide is incredibly hopeful. And most of the time when I educate people about this, they get very upset about it. Because you can see that if you look at the time across the bottom, it goes from time 0 to 58 months. Well, 58 months is like what? That's almost 6 years, right? So you've got this huge time frame. But this is what success looks like. That if I was to say, okay, why don't we engage in an episode of trying to manage your weight, and you do that by really paying attention to calories and focusing on physical activity, but that once you achieve 5%, 7%, and I hope you're sitting down, no more than 10%. So a 250-pound person, when they hit 225 pounds, we would say stop. Switch from weight loss to weight maintenance. And now spend a long time, 8 months, 12 months, 18 months, not gaining any weight. And the whole purpose here is to create permanent weight loss. Then do it again, then do it again. So you can see over this period of time, the person goes through 3 or 4 of these episodes. When I was a psychologist, I look at this and I think, hey, I lost it. Good news. Hey, I kept it off. Great news. Guess what? I lost more. Couldn't be better. And I kept that one off. And then I lost more. So you can see what I'm trying to really emphasize here, and I apologize for being a bit dramatic, but I really mean this. What I'm emphasizing here is that if we work with our bodies, with our biology, with our society, then what we have the chance to do is actually achieve goals, but that are sequentially successful. Bias is really important, and these are very commonly held beliefs, right? Many of us would say in our society, anything worth having is worth working for. If you really want something and you don't give up, you can get it. And I understand why people would say you can be all that you can want to be. We live in a society that's really focused on personal control. But what's interesting is that these normal, healthy beliefs that most people would endorse are the reason why people have biases. Because, if you don't get it and you wanted it, well, then you're not working for it, right? And if you're lazy and you're sloppy and these are the source of it. So that sort of control focused beliefs often associated with getting people. When a tragedy happens, what's the question that people ask? They ask three questions. They ask why, why? And this is called the just world hypothesis. Human nature is to try to figure out, to explain what's happened to us. And so what this tells us is that really bad things only happen to bad people, right? We don't want to know that things that happen that have no reason behind them. So I'm just describing normal psychology, but how it can lead to the bias against obesity. And there are ways that we can address this. And these are some important ways that we can modify beliefs about cause and controllability. So we need to be having open conversations about people that achieve high weights. Then that could be due to many, many different causes. And it's not all behavioral. It could be pregnancies, it could be genetics, it could be medications, it could be other diseases, etc., etc., etc. We need to focus on promoting empathy, acceptance, and liking. I gave a lecture in the first year medical school a month ago, and we brought along asked an individual living with obesity to be part of this panel that we were on. And then we had a conversation about healthy behavior. We had everybody in the room stand up, and then we called out healthy behavior and asked that if anybody was not engaged in those behaviors to sit down. So things like drinking moderately, eating healthy, being physically active, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened is that at the end of these series of questions, there was one person standing in the room. Everyone else had sat down because they weren't engaging in some behavior. And the only person standing in the room was the person living with obesity who was there. And that you should have seen the medical students. They were absolutely just really impacted by that. And so we have to understand that people living with obesity often are engaged in huge amounts of positive, healthy, respected behaviors. And so changing these social consensus and these social norms is something that's really important to us. If you're familiar with the web, this is from Yale University in the United States. There's a psychologist there by the name of Rebecca Puhl, and she does a lot of work in this field, and she's an excellent, excellent psychologist to promote this. I recommend this to most clinicians that I see around obesity management. That is, this is about preventing weight bias, and I put this up to you. The website's there. It's something that perhaps you might find of value as well, both in terms of your own attitudes, but also in terms of your conversations with your friends, your colleagues, and your healthcare providers. Now, I want to switch from the kind of down to sort of the actual meat of change. How do people actually change their behavior? And what we're trying to do in our field is consider this concept of readiness to change. And so, motivation is critically important, and it has to be developed and managed and worked upon. And so the way you determine readiness is the first thing you do is you have to be ready to do what, right? So what are you trying to change? So what are the behaviors that you would have to change to achieve a best weight? So what would be on the table for you to consider changing? And you should feel free to negotiate with people around that, to talk to people and to identify what you think would be a reasonable thing to change. And once you've got an idea of what that would change, then you do what we call a readiness assessment. And here's what a readiness assessment. So let's say that were thinking that the way to manage better weight would be to shift your eating pattern from skipping breakfast and eating really minimal at lunch and then overeating at the end of the day to three regular meals. So we would say, well, do you consider the fact that you're skipping breakfast a problem? Are you distressed by the fact that you're skipping breakfast? Are you actually interested in starting breakfast? And are you ready to begin starting breakfasts now. And it could be any behavior, smoking, it could be nighttime eating, it could be physical activity. And what we do is kind of help you to get to the behavior. So that readiness assessment, we call it the traffic light assessment, because what that means is we listen to the answers to those questions, and if it's ready, if you're green light, both it's a problem that bothers you, that you're interested in changing, and you're actually prepared to do that behavior in the moment, we go right into what we call behavior modification, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to know, importantly, you don't have to be ready. That when supporting health behavior change, in fact, is really about helping people who aren't ready become ready. It probably wouldn't surprise you to know that people that are ready usually solve their own problems. Remember my early slides. So you may not be fully ready. Maybe there's a party that wants to, but there's a concern. So for instance, many people who skip breakfast, they skip breakfast because they're trying to make up for overeating the day before. So they kind of get into this pattern. So missing breakfast might be a problem, but it's also a solution to yesterday's problem. So there might be good reasons why people are struggling with that. So they've got pulled in two directions. We call that ambivalent. And we would touch on behavior. So you would, if somebody was ambivalent, and part of them wants to and part of them doesn't, we would sort of say, well, why don't you try some of it on, see what it's like. But then what we do is we call expanding on readiness. So what's meaningful enough in your life to do this? What's important enough in your life to do this? How do we help you connect this behavior to your principles? How do we help you realize that the value is working, may be challenging at the beginning, but beneficial down the road? So this is, and it's really, really rewarding to engage people along this way. Everyone has an important story. Our stories are really our life and our dignity and our worth. And if we start to connect our values, our principles into the behaviors that are associated with healthy weights, then boy, that's what moves people. Not clinical recommendations. And equally important are people who might not quite be ready. If you're not ready, that's okay. Because what we want to do is understand what the barriers are. So what does it mean to you, and how do you view it in terms of where you fit with regard to behavior change? And I run the Behavior Change Institute, and that's what this is really about. It's about helping providers and individuals figure out where are you on the stage of readiness and how do we help move you forward. And the message I want to send here is that there is a way forward, and our job is to work with you. When you get to behavior, then it's time now to say, okay, I'm ready to go. I know what I want to do. How do I get started? And the first step is what we call a first step goal. And so this would be by two real important things. One is it achievable? That is it realistic? Can you actually do it? And if you did it, would it make a difference? And so look at whatever behavior you're thinking about and think about it in the sense that, is this actually something that I could achieve? Is it actually what we would call a doable behavior? And if I did it, would it make a difference? And then that leads to next step goals, which is exactly the same thing. The next step goal would be both doable and worthwhile. So the pathway of behavior change is not go big or go home. It's not get to the goal as fast as possible. It's by slow, sure steps. And I think all of us would recognize that expression that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single footstep, or slow and steady wins the race. And it's actually very, very true. And what this does is, if it sets up the following pattern, if you're able to follow these pathways, then the chances are what will happen is that you'll have a success because it's doable, followed by a success because it's doable, followed by a success because it's doable. And this is what we call shaping. It actually brings the behavior up to the level that achieves best outcomes. But behavior is controlled not just by what we do, but also by our environment. And one of the ways that we can change our behavior is to change our environment. And I'll show you this with a very simple example. And this strategy is called stimulus control. So if we were doing this session live, I would ask you the question, do any of you like to eat potato chips? And most of you would put up your hand. And I would say, okay, so I'll make you healthier in your potato chip consumption, but I want you to eat all the chips you want, anytime you want, free feeding. I'm just going to change your access. I'm just going to change the stimulus. So the following two rules would result in healthier potato chip eating. Rule number one, never eat chips at home. If chips only occurred outside, you would eat fewer chips. Stimulus control number two, you can only have one bag in your possession at any time, and it can never be greater than 75 grams. So tonight, if you're home and you're watching TV and you open up a 300-gram bag of potato chips, then all of us are likely to eat 300 grams of potato chips just because they're there. But if you had to make a decision tonight, oh, do I want chips or do I want to relax? And you say, okay, no, I want chips. And then you go out, you have to go out and buy them and eat them outside. You'd literally have to buy 4 bags in succession to get 300 grams. It's just too much work. And remember, healthy behavior has become abnormal behavior because our environment makes it so easy to engage in the unhealthy behavior. So stimulus control has the potential to be a very creative approach to allow people to find healthier built environments that are personal to them. But we know that it takes a long time to transfer sort of that external drive to internal drive. And once it happens, then the behavior tends to continue. And we believe that the best way to do that would be to have reinforcements. So incentives. Set a goal, get a reward. Set a goal, get a reward. And again, creative work needs to happen in order to figure out what rewards are effective and can be administered to people. But when we make changes, the critical thing here is to talk about how we can support sustained behavior change. So not only changing in the moment, but continuing with your behavior. And that, we believe, requires identifying emotional, psychological, and social issues. And as a psychologist in obesity, my kind of request is that we take these psychological issues and we take them out of the closet and we put them right out in the public light and we have a conversation. Things like, I don't know who doesn't turn to food when they're stressed, and who really would not eat or drink something if everybody at the table was having it, right? I mean, we know that this is just the way it is. So we really need to just identify, get these issues out so that we can use our problem-solving skills. Also, really important here is to think about when you engage in unhealthy behavior, almost always people do that for a reason. So smokers will smoke because it manages their stress, it's social, it curbs their appetite. So we would need to help them find another way of accomplishing those goals if they're going to have a choice. We call that replacing the function. If you're an emotional eater and you eat when you're stressed, what are other forms of stress management that you can engage in that would give you a choice? And so you could manage those emotions with food or with something else. And so it's really important that people have be what we call empowered so they can make those functional choices. And the last point here is just to sort of summarize all this, that the formula for sustained behavior change would be when that new behavior becomes part of how the person sees themselves. So if I introduced myself to you, I might say, hi, my name is Michael, I'm a runner, which is true, by the way. But point being a runner is not just what I do, it's who I am, my image, how I see myself. It's important to me that I have physical activity as part of my life. Self-efficacy, that's the confidence we talked about. Social support, it's really important that we engage other people in ways that make this important. And this is something that's changed. When, I don't know how old you are, but 25 years ago, if you went to a house party in the evening, you would only be served alcohol. There was no option. People just went to parties and they drank. But now that's not the case at all. Now, if you go to a party, first of all, you're going to be offered, would you like, we have beer, we have wine, we have some spirits, so we have water, we have juice. And so it's really changed. And if you go to a party and you say, I'm the designated drinker, then people just automatically, sometimes in bars, many bars, if you declare yourself as a designated driver, they'll serve you soft drinks for free just because it protects the kind of establishment. So, social support, how do we engage people? And then, as I'd mentioned before, stress management and physical discharge, physical calming, emotional expression, and maintaining social connections. Okay, so I'm done now. What I have here is a little cartoon, and we know that these lectures can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. So I hope I haven't really bored you to death. My email address is there. tvalis at dalhalsey.ca. And we have a website that we use as part of our Behavior Change Institute that can be helpful. And really, in closing, I just want to thank you for your attention to this lecture. I hope it provides you some useful information. And as was described to you by Brad at the beginning, this has been recorded, so there's no opportunity for live questions, but you do have the opportunity to comment and to question, and those will be fed back. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will stop now.
Well, thanks very much, Dr. Vallis. We appreciate a fascinating presentation. I think everybody can walk away with something to think about. And just as a reminder, we're putting the slide back up. If you do have questions for Dr. Vallis or for the Canadian Obesity Network, you can reach us by tweeting to us using the hashtag ObesityTalk. You can find us on Facebook. Click the link on your screen there. Or you can complete our evaluation survey, which also has the ability to ask questions. We hope you do complete that survey. We do want to hear from you about our selection of speakers and topics, and you can recommend other speakers and other topics that you might like to see. So that concludes our webinar for today. We thank everybody for taking the time to participate, and we'll see you at our next installment in May.